Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me to talk about MBTI. Today we're going to be talking about one of the things that can be really challenging when you're trying to decide what your MBTI type is. And that is, am I a sensor or am I an intuitive? But before we get to sensing and intuition specifically, I just want to make sure everyone is on the same page about what MBTI really assesses. With MBTI, what we are talking about are natural inborn preferences that everyone has. It's a lot like being right or left-handed. So keep in mind as we talk today that you will do both things like a sensor and things like an intuitive. However, what MBTI theory tells us and what the data shows is that everyone has one of the letters in each dichotomy, in this case, sensing and intuition, that they naturally prefer. So when we're talking about sensing and intuition, what I want you to think about is which one feels most comfortable to you. You're going to probably do both of these things. Everyone does to some degree. Some people are a little more balanced. Some people are pretty clearly one or the other. But to some degree, we all use both of these. So as you're thinking about it, it often helps to think about which one do you do first. All right, so speaking of first, let's talk about sensors first. Sensors like to see it, hear it, touch it, taste it, smell it to know it's real. They are focused on specifics and details that will help them determine what's real and what's true in this situation. And because they like specifics and because they like details, they can sometimes have trouble stepping back and seeing the bigger picture, seeing how things are connected. Now, remember, if you're a sensor, you probably do that, but most sensors need to look at the details and the specifics first, and then they use those specifics to get to the bigger picture. Also, sensors tend to be very rooted in the here and the now. So they want information that's going to be helpful and useful to them today. Don't tell me about tomorrow, because when tomorrow gets here, I'll deal with tomorrow. And especially don't talk to me about a year from now or 5 years from now. If you force a sensor to, they can look to the future. But most of the time, what sensors are focused on are the practical realities of today. Now, if you ask a sensor to plan for the future, and everyone has to plan for the future at some point, they're going to look at their past experience and they're going to say, what did I learn in the past? And they're going to take that information and they're going to try to apply it to what's happening right now. Another thing about sensors is the way they learn is very sequential. So teach me step 1, then step 2, then step 3. Don't jump around between ideas, but really teach me each step as you go. And best case is to give the sensor time to practice each step and a model to follow. Okay, so sensors really want to know that they're doing things correctly, that they're doing it the right way. So oftentimes when sensors learn new things, what's most helpful to them is to have a model or a rubric or something like that where they can say, oh, okay, if I do it this way, then that's doing it the right way. And for a sensor, once they learn how to do something, once they learn the routine or they learn the process or whatever, then they like to do that process over and over again and perfect it because they feel like that repetition really helps them understand the process and make sure that they're doing it right. So in terms of learning, sensors tend to like classes where there's a very clear right and wrong. So they tend to like classes like math and science. Maybe not some of the higher level math and science classes where things start to become more abstract, but the very concrete kinds of math and science where if you answer a question and you get it wrong, it's really easy to see once someone shows you the steps where you made your mistake. And they tend not to like the classes that I technically call the squishy classes. Classes like literature and sociology, psychology, where It's really more about, can you make a case for why your interpretation of this poem is better than someone else's interpretation, where there can be gray area and there's not really one, quote, right answer. When they ask questions, they tend to be looking for two different things. What am I supposed to do? And how am I supposed to do it? And then once they know that, they feel really comfortable and they can move forward, no problem, with doing the process itself. Okay? So that's sensors. Now, I want you to kind of shift gears in your head a little. Maybe think about, does that fit you? And now let's talk about intuitives. And so, like most of the dichotomies, well, like all of the dichotomies really, intuitives are the opposite of sensors in terms of how they gather information and the kind of information that they find most important, most interesting, and that they tend to focus on first. So for intuitives, rather than focusing on their 5 senses, they tend to focus on their 6th sense, their gut, their instinct, their intuition. And so for intuitives, while facts and data can be nice, it's not where they start. For intuitives, where they start is with that gut instinct and also with the big picture, possibilities, options, looking at how the whole picture plays out first, and then refining that down to the details. And in fact, if you try to tell an intuitive how to do something and you just start by giving them the steps and they don't know where they're headed, they don't know what that end result or big picture or final product is supposed to be, they will most likely either be confused or ask you a lot of questions about why are we doing it this way and what's the end goal and all of that. Even if they learn the process that way, if they can't connect the steps of the process to the overall goal, they will most likely forget the steps or not remember the order, because intuitives really need to have a context for the information that they're learning. Some more things about intuitives. Intuitives tend to be very future focused. Where do we want to be a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now? And so the longer they can look to the future, the further out they can project where they want to be and what they want to do, the easier it becomes for them to figure out what to do today. So by definition, because intuitives like to look to the future, they also tend to take in information in terms of what are the options, what are the possibilities, what are the things that might happen, what are the things that could happen. Again, very different from sensors who look at actual facts and data, things that are verifiable, things that they can evaluate for truth or not. So when intuitives are really, really focused on the future, they don't have those facts and that data, and that's okay for intuitives. They feel very comfortable living in the realm of possibility and what might happen. And they often are able to think about multiple different possibilities. Now, what's interesting is that for sensors, they kind of feel like sometimes intuitives are making things up, right? Because intuitives are relying on information that isn't verifiable. They're relying on their gut. They're relying on possibilities to make their decisions. And to sensors, that feels like they're kind of making things up out of thin air. So I think for sensors, intuitives can be frustrating because it's like, wait a minute, back up. Where's your data? What do you have to support that idea? And intuitives are saying, well, I don't have any data yet, but I'll get it. I'll gather it on the back end after I've sort of made my decision based on the possibilities. And I think for intuitives, it can be frustrating that sensors are so heavily reliant on facts and data that they're not willing to look at possibilities and things that might happen, because intuitives love new approaches to things. They really like to think outside the box and come up with new ways to do things. So they look at those possibilities and options, and then they use those to help them try to create the best way to approach a situation. Okay, now let's talk about learning. Intuitives learn by making connections between ideas. And so if you've ever been talking to someone and they started off over here talking about something and then they kind of jumped over here and they were talking about something else and then they went over here and they were talking about something else altogether and you got kind of lost, that person was most likely an intuitive. And those ideas were connected very clearly, probably, in the intuitive's head. But intuitives don't often share those connections out loud. They just expect that everyone else is kind of making those same connections. And so it can seem very difficult to follow an intuitive at times because the connections that they're making are unique to them. So for intuitives, they learn by making those connections. So intuitives sometimes struggle with their memories if they don't make a connection between the idea that they're trying to learn and something else to help them remember that. For an intuitive to remember something, they have to file it in their brain in a way that they will remember how to retrieve it. So they have to make a connection because it's challenging for intuitives to remember isolated pieces of information because, again, context is everything to intuitives. So think about what we just talked about with intuitives and see if maybe that fits you a little better. And to summarize, what I really want you to think about are these few high-level things. Sensors, very practical and realistic. They like facts and data. They're very focused on today, the here and now. They use their past experience to inform the future. And they learn in a very concrete, step-by-step, sequential kind of way. And most sensors are going to do those things first. Intuitives, on the other hand, are very focused on the big picture. They make connections between random pieces of information. They're very future focused and they like talking about options and possibilities, and they don't necessarily need facts and data to reach a conclusion. They learn by making connections, and they have to have those connections in order to remember things. And they prefer to first focus on those big picture, broader kinds of pieces of information. They don't even typically notice the details until they've gotten that big picture view. And then they drill down to the data and to the details. So ask yourself this: do you first start with the details and move to the big picture? Or do you start with the big picture and move to the details? Hopefully, this explanation of sensing and intuition has helped you decide which one fits you best. If you still have questions, we have other videos on our YouTube channel that will explain sensing and intuition in more detail. And please take a second and check out some of our other videos on the other dichotomies and on other aspects of type. Thanks so much for watching.